and welcome to tonight's Commonwealth World Affairs program. My name is DJ Patil. I'm the former U.S. Chief Data Scientist, and more importantly, worked down the hall from Maya Shankar, who we'll talk about in a second. And I'm also a member of the Commonwealth Club World Affairs Board of Governors. A few reminders before we get started. First of all, I want to welcome back all of you that are our members here. For those that are joining us and aren't members, there are people that will check on the way out and make sure that you decide to sign up with one, so have your credit card ready. But seriously, consider becoming one if you can. Second, tonight's program is being recorded, so you all know what that means. Turn off your phones. We haven't invested yet to get one of those cool things that you see when you go to the movies and make you shame you into turning off your phone. So please turn off your phones if you haven't already. Third, if you have questions for Dr. Maya Shankar, please fill out these cards. They look like this. They're on your seats. Or if you're online, please do it through the chat on YouTube, and someone will come around and pick them up and get them to us so we can get your questions answered. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Maya Shankar. I have been so excited to do this session when I first learned that Maya was working on this book. I got to first meet Maya at the White House and see her firsthand unleash her awesomeness across an incredible wide swath of problems that we'll get into. And ever since then, I've been a fan. She also has this amazing ability, as you can tell from her smile, to light up a room and change the dynamics in some of the toughest conversations and negotiations. Since then, she's gone on to do even more incredible things. Her TED Talk has been viewed over 2 million times. Her podcast, A Slight Change of Plan, is very popular. It's so popular, it is Apple's Podcast of the Year in 2021, and it has guests on from Chris Hemsworth, Michael Lewis, Brene Brown, and our colleague Vivek Murthy, and even Hillary Clinton. Now she has her new book, The Other Side of Change, Who We Become When Life Makes Other Plans. So Maya, welcome to the Commonwealth World Affairs Club.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
So much fun.
This is going to be exciting because we got a lot of ground to cover. So the first place I wanted to start, I was thinking, where do we start with this book? Because there's so many great entry points to talk about. And the part I wanted to start with is this quote you have from Dan Gilbert, which is, people, it seems, regard the present as a watershed moment at which they have finally become the person they will be for the rest of their lives. And then you go on to say, but we are constantly evolving, and a major disruption in our lives can accelerate this process. When a big change happens to us, it can lead to profound change within us. Tell us what you mean by that, and how that kind of takes us into this theory of your work that you've been really on through the podcast and the book.
Yeah, I should first say that the reason I wrote this book is that I am really scared of unexpected change. Very bad at it. I wouldn't use me as an example of someone who knows how to pivot well. And so I was trying to find something hopeful in the sphere of unexpected change. Not something so saccharine you don't believe it, but something that was truthful, but something to hold on to during the hardest moments of our lives, when that proverbial anvil drops from the sky, everything's going according to plan, and then suddenly you're faced with an unexpected diagnosis, or the loss of a loved one, or a betrayal by a friend, or the revealing of a secret, whatever it is, right? These things that turn our lives upside down. It's so easy in those moments to think, oh my God, why did this have to happen to me? And there's nothing redemptive about this experience. This sucks, right? What I realized, though, is that when we feel very daunted at the outset of a change, and we think we can't possibly survive what we're up against, we are in fact falling prey to a cognitive illusion, a cognitive bias called the end of history illusion. So this is part of the quote you read by Dan Gilbert and his colleagues. And what the end of history illusion basically says is that while we fully acknowledge that we have changed profoundly in the past, so you need only show me some photos of 10-year-old Maya or 20-year-old Maya to make this very salient, I would have a hashtag cringe moment and try and forge as much distance as I possibly could between present Maya and that version of Maya. But then interestingly, DJ, if you were to ask me, well, how much do you expect to change moving forward? I would basically be like, oh, no, what you see is what you get, finished product over here. All my beliefs and perspectives and values, all that stuff is fixed, and I'm done changing. And what a funny quirk of the way that we are. I don't know if it was a product of evolution where it's just stabilizing to feel like every moment reflects the final moment of our evolution.
I was ask about this because, like, where does this? Because you have this super unique depth of science knowledge, and like I was reading this and thinking about change, I was like, wait, as a species, as nomadic, aren't you always in a moment of change? But then, like, why isn't that? Why are we more comfortable with change?
Yeah,
given that we lived in a world of change.
It's such a great question, and I actually think we are both unbelievably great at navigating change, but then also very psychically daunted by change. Those two things can coexist, and I think it does make sense because when you are facing an unexpected moment, you want all of that preparedness to kick into gear, right? You want to be problem solving and planning and oftentimes catastrophizing, right? Like if the lion's going to charge, like you need a plan. And so you want your brain to enter into this high functioning mindset when you are confronting change, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we as humans are not really good at it. As you said, by definition, like by virtue of all of us still being here, that's evidence that we're great at adapting to change. But everything we're good at isn't necessarily something that we like, right? And so it was very reassuring to me when I realized, okay, so we're constantly changing. What that means is the person who will confront the enormity of what's up ahead is not just going to be the current version of Maya. There's actually a different version of me that's sitting in the future, who has new values and perspectives and beliefs and ways of seeing themselves and the world around them that will potentially be more capable and able to navigate this experience. And so, look, I mean, I'm as cynical as the next person. Like, when I hear that there's a silver lining to change, my instinct is like, really? Or are you just saying that because it makes you feel better about this like horrible situation you went through? But I like to say I'm allergic to two things, soy and platitudes. And so I was definitely skeptical. But then what's really interesting about this book writing experience is the last chapter unexpectedly turned into a memoir chapter. Yeah. And it was about my struggles starting a family and not having success. Yeah, but just to foreshadow a tiny bit and to not eat into whatever your interview script is, I just wanted to share that when I experienced that transformation myself, I started to believe it. Because otherwise it's just words on a page. You're like, or you see it in someone else's story, but you think, am I capable of that kind of transformation? Could I possibly end up better on the other side of not achieving my dream? And naturally you're skeptical. And I feel grateful that I unexpectedly got to experience the self version of it.
Well, what goes on in my head is, when I read that first chapter, even I thought, "What the heck?"
That's always the reaction you want from a first chapter,
in a very
right?
powerful way. Because, I finished the first chapter and I was like, "I got to take a emotional pause here."
Totally,
because
yes.
it is really. I mean,
it's intense.
Like talk about, no pun intended here. Well, it is like a little bit. I was locked in. And maybe, like, let's just, so we don't spoil the whole book, but talk a little bit about that first story, because I think it's such a powerful anchor of like,
totally,
how different your life could be, and talk about, like, and to your point, like silver linings, you're just like, what, like, I mean, why don't you go?
Yeah, no, I mean, so Olivia, who's the first chapter, she actually reached out to me on Instagram. She just DM'd me and was like, hey, I heard your podcast, A Slight Change of Plans. I want you to know that I suffered a severe brainstem stroke in my early 20s that left me locked in. locked-in syndrome. So for those of you who have read The Diving Bell and the Butterfly or watched the movie, this is a condition in which you lose all voluntary control of the muscles in your body, with the exception of your eyes. So the only thing that you can do is blink or move your eyes from left to right, and that's your sole portal for communicating with the outside world. So caregivers will just slide their letters across a letterboard, and the patient will blink when they get to the right letter, and that's how they painstakingly communicate with the world around them. So Olivia sends me this DM and is like, hey, just like one day I'd like to chat. I'm like, hi, are you free in like 5 seconds? And instead of a podcast episode, like, I don't know, would you be willing to go on a 3-year journey with me when I write a book? Because I want you to be in the book. Oh. It was such a captivating story. I could not imagine being robbed of all those faculties. And in many ways, you're actually helping me to see something even more poignant about her story, which is I'm secular, I'm not a particularly spiritual person. I don't have some of the soft landings that people have in the face of tumult. But I've always felt that my psychology was a soft landing. Like, you could always change your mind a little bit. You could always change the way that you frame something, the way that you see something. We all know the popular refrain, you can't control what happens to you, but you can control your reaction to what happens. And I didn't know how to execute on that, but part of my goal with the book was actually to figure out what is that manual, right? Like, what is the guide to actually changing how you feel about something? But it's so empowering to believe that the brain is, in fact, this pliable, malleable thing where subtle shifts in the way you frame something could massively affect the way that you view the world.
Well, let's give people a little bit of a glimmer to anchor that into things. So from her story, of going from, at such a severe hemorrhage at such a young age,
yeah,
to this path, give a little glimmer of like that psychology that you learned from her as
yes.
lessons, or sort of used the science to say, oh, actually, these are the end things that we could then take away from this. Because I couldn't imagine myself, very frankly, having gone through that and
exactly.
coming out with that mindset that she did.
Yeah, and so, Olivia's story is the perfect example of what it means, where all you can change is your mind. Mm-hmm. She has no ability to change anything else. Is the starkest example of what my work is about. As you can imagine, early on, following her diagnosis, she falls into a fairly intense depression. But what I found so captivating about her story was the unexpected angle of it that I wasn't anticipating I would find. So when I first heard Olivia, I heard the story beats. I thought, okay, this is going to be a story about a young woman's perseverance and the arduous physical therapy involved in trying to get to the other side. Actually, her story was about identity. And what I love as a cognitive scientist is when I find an exceptional story, an unbelievable story, and I mean that in the definitional sense of the word, but a very universal, relatable lesson that sits inside of it. And it turns out that Olivia, like many of us, was a people pleaser. She really, really cared what other people thought of her. And she was constantly trying to win the approval of other people. And what happened post brainstem stroke is that she completely lost her ability to curate any version of herself that she thought would be palatable to the people in her life, including her boyfriend and her boyfriend's family, whose respect she never felt that she earned. And I think we're all kind of, that's like a mirror reflecting back at all of us right now. Social media, whatnot, we are all creating avatars of ourselves each and every day that we think reflect our best selves. And this person, by brute force, has to become comfortable, has to learn to embrace a kind of radical self-acceptance, because she cannot be who she wants to be in front of people. She has to be okay with the rawest, most vulnerable, most authentic version of herself. And so I don't want to give too much away for those of you who are going to read the book, but it is actually this beautiful story of the malleability of self-identity, where we anchor our worth and the deliberate choices we can make around where we anchor that worth. It's not fixed just because it was always one way. You can actually change where the center of gravity is in your life. It made me reflect on my own experience of identity loss. So long story short, when I was a little kid, I was an aspiring concert violinist. And I was...
To say you were aspiring, you were good.
I was.
Why do you let's talk about how good you were.
Okay, so I started studying.
That was I was going to talk. We're going to talk a little bit about
okay,
this. But why don't we switch to that?
I started studying at Juilliard when I was 9, and when I was a teenager, the renowned violinist Itzhak Perlman took me on as his private student, and so I was one of only a handful of people he took on, and that was really the vote of confidence that I needed to feel like I had what it took. Because, it's easy to see Juilliard, oh, she's good, but I had so much imposter syndrome. It was like oozing out of my body. I mean, when you go to a place like Juilliard, you are surrounded just by just unbelievable amounts of talent that it's funny to hear you say you were good, because I'm like, I was meh, but I realized I was meh, obviously in like an elite tier, but my psychology did not think I was great at all. So anyway, I was hopeful
Compared to my violin skills at the same age you were.
That's funny. My husband, it's so funny. My husband actually played the violin for about 10 years too, and he hated it. So he was really scared when we got married, like, oh God, she's going to drag me to all these classical music concerts. I was like, I'll go easy on you, Jimmy. At our wedding, my dad goes, Jimmy too started playing the violin at age 6, and just 4 years later, he was 10. So anyway, I was hoping to maybe become a professional. And then I had my slight change of plans. I had an acute injury. I damaged tendons in my hand after this long, protracted, drawn-out period of experimental surgeries and taking excessive amounts of anti-inflammatories and physical therapy and other treatments. I just was not getting better. The pain was not subsiding, and doctors basically told me, sorry, kid, you got to give up your dream. And in engaging with Olivia's story, I started to see that experience through a new lens, which was, when I lost the violin, I didn't feel like I had just lost an instrument. I felt like I had lost myself in this much more foundational way. I think sometimes we don't realize how much something has come to define us until we lose that very thing. But we sort of naturally gravitate towards different roles and labels. And in order to feel meaning and purpose in this world, we anchor ourselves to them because they satisfy that craving. But then when the unexpected thing happens and that thing is pulled away from you, it can leave you feeling very unmoored, right? And so in losing the violin, I was losing a lot of my self-confidence. I was losing what gave my life structure and meaning. I was losing my sense of belonging. DJ and I were bonding backstage. You grew up in Utah, right? So he had a couple brown kids in his community. I had a couple brown kids in my school, but I was bullied a ton. And in my more international music community, my skin color didn't matter at all. The kids were so nice to me. They embraced me. So much was entangled with Maya, the violinist identity. And so it's taken me now decades to distill what I hope is a valuable lesson that each of you can use as you navigate future changes in your life, which is it's quite precarious to attach our identity too much to what we do. And that's because life can easily take the what away. Instead, we can anchor our identity to why we do the things we do. So in my case, I was drawn to the violin because it gave me a vehicle for emotionally connecting with people. I loved being in conversation with my peers, with the audience. Maybe I could make someone feel something they hadn't felt before. And just because I lost the violin didn't mean that I lost what led me to love it in the first place. That part of me was still very much intact. And the exercise then became, well, how else can I express this part of myself? And it turns out I kind of subconsciously gravitated towards spheres where I could fulfill this deep need, right? I think about our jobs at the White House, regardless of whatever technical area we are in, it was a people job. It was all about building relationships with humans, either the ones that worked inside our building or the populations we were serving, right? my podcast, A Slight Change of Plans, I get to go into the closet of our place at home.
Yeah, people think that you have like a fancy recording studio.
Yeah, dude, Costco blankets. That is what is lined. Like, I remember it was COVID. We got this like little shoebox closet, and I told my poor husband Jimmy, I was like, okay, so got to clear out the closet. Obviously, my clothes are staying, so we're gonna put yours, over here on the bed. And then we just bought we Instacarted Costco moving blankets because it wasn't safe to go into stores. And then I ordered a mic, and that's still the setup today. And it's not like your closet isn't the place you expect to meet Hillary Clinton for the first time, especially with clothes like strewn everywhere. So it's a little bit of an underwhelming experience for the guests to be like, her? So this is.
Did you tell her like live?
She could see it, right?
Could see it, yeah.
I mean, Hillary Clinton is not taking these podcast episodes from her closet. Okay, she's in a very nice home, and I was like, "Hi, Secretary Clinton. This is not the environment that I thought we would be meeting in, but apologies." So. How incredible is that like, I could fulfill this need for human connection through the podcast, through my book, through conversations like this. And so I would urge all of you to just engage in the thought experiment. What is your why? What is the thing that draws you towards what you love to do? Maybe it is service. Maybe it is a love of learning. Maybe it's getting better at a skill. Maybe it's having a creative outlet. Don't judge what it is. It just is what it is. People love what they love. And then try to make part of your self-identity that why. Because then when life throws that curveball at you and you're feeling totally disoriented, it can be a safe landing, a soft landing. It can be a compass that helps guide you towards your next steps. And I actually heard from someone who had listened to this what versus why distinction in my TED Talk. He had been a human rights lawyer, went to Harvard, was a Rhodes Scholar, super impressive dude. And then he got a very debilitating long COVID diagnosis. And he had to file for unemployment. He hasn't been able to work for years. His name's Scott. And as you can imagine, he was feeling completely despondent. Like, wow, I've lost everything that I've ever worked towards. But then he asked himself, well, what's my why? And he realized, well, I like giving a voice to populations who don't always have a voice. That's why I became a human rights lawyer in the first place. I can't do that in the legal space right now because of my physical and intellectual limitations. But I absolutely can do that for the long hauler community. And so since then, Scott is just this dynamo who's drafting legislation. He's fighting for research funding for experimental treatments. He's sharing people's stories who are afflicted by this, whose lives have been turned upside down. And I think that's just one of the most beautiful illustrations of the permanence of that aspect of identity over time, which is often what our psyche needs so that we can still feel somewhat stable day to day.
Well, let's talk about that why from the angle of, I think it's one thing to say that. I think we hear it, if we see it on a bumper or we're in a room, somebody says, what's your why? We're like, yeah, we should do that.
Yeah.
Figuring it out is another thing.
Totally.
And what's the advice that you have found that you're giving people or you have learned across this incredible body of work and research that you've done that helps people figure out their why?
Yeah.
And let me add one thing to it.
Yeah.
Because the part is like, I think there's a lot of times you may figure out your why, but you're in systems or organizations or sometimes even family members who question your why.
100%. I love that you asked this question because, I want to share one anecdote, which is that I didn't know I had a why, and I certainly undervalued my why until I had a conversation with a friend and colleague. So I think it was the beginning of 2020, and we were on a walk. Or no, it was like right before COVID started, and I was just starting to feel like, okay. I remember. So I'd been doing helping Mayor Pete with debate prep for his 2020 run. It was such an exciting year, and the campaign had just ended, and I was feeling, feeling like a little bit of a lull, like, okay, what comes next? And I still remember my husband was like, well, we could learn bridge. And I was like, oh my God, that's making me more depressed. Like, that's not helping at all, Jimmy. It was so sweet because he was like, it's a couples thing. We could learn it together. So, God bless him. But I don't want to play bridge. That's not going to, and he's like, other people are like, you could try like video. Nothing was energizing me. And so I remember going on a walk with my friend Hyunsu, and I said, I just feel like I have no passions. Like, I love eating. I really like sleeping, but like, I don't like anything. And he's like, what are you talking about, Shankar? You love humans. Yeah. And I was like, and? He's like, that's a passion. Like, you love figuring people out and cracking the nut and being in dialogue. And I was like, that's not a real passion. It's like a fake passion. And he's like, take it from someone who doesn't love humans. He's like, that's a thing. That's a why. And I share this because I think that the things that sometimes we're really good at or we naturally gravitate towards, we undervalue. And I grew up in kind of that stereotypical Indian home from the perspective of like quantitative focus. So my dad is a theoretical physicist. My brothers were both like math, computer science geniuses. My sister was like acing all the math competitions, and I'm playing the violin. So it's like, that part of my brain doesn't work like theirs. And so I think the people side of me, and no one ever told me this. Like, my parents were always very supportive, but you just inherit assumptions about hierarchy and what matters and what doesn't and what's special and what's not, right? And so I think I just never thought that was a why until someone pointed out to me. This was someone, by the way, this is Hyunsu, who worked with me in the White House and then now works with me at Google, and he was able to see the benefit of me being really interested in human beings and the human mind, right? In terms of how that translates into work. And so one thing is, whatever you discover through the process I'm about to describe, please don't devalue it. It's a very natural thing to do. Second is, I got the best advice on this front from Angela Duckworth. She's the famous psychologist who studies grit. She said to try to reflect back on childhood and how you spent your playtime. It's a really good indicator of what you were drawn to before society imposed expectations on you or started to limit you because of opportunities that were available to some people and not others. And so she was talking about, she ended up a psychologist. So she was saying, as a little kid, she was really interested in humans, and it actually expressed itself recently. She and her husband were looking for a home, and they were reading some of the write-ups by the couples that were trying to sell their home, and the husband's looking at square footage and like, is the foundation sturdy? What about the rain leaks? And she's like, ooh, the couple before this one, where they got divorced? Why? I want to know all the drama, all the gossip behind it. And I was thinking about little Maya on the playground and like, was I the adventurer on like, the monkey bars? Absolutely not. Did it take me a year to learn how to do one flip around the bar? Absolutely it did. But was I like observing all the social groups and trying to understand people and trying to anticipate what other people were thinking about me and vice versa? 100%. And so I think that can be a nice little thought experiment. It's like, when I had free, unstructured time as a kid, what did I naturally find myself doing? And maybe it was drawing or creating imaginary worlds. And so your why is creating. Like, you love just building anything from scratch, whether it's a story or a home or whatnot. But yeah, I thought that was really phenomenal advice.
So sometimes I think we come from places of incredible privilege. We have very supportive partners. We have family
100%.
members who are really caring and open and receptive to our nutty ideas. We have friends and family who hold us accountable, help us see who we really are. I think that there are a lot of people who don't have that, and in fact, there's a narrative through the book of people who don't have that, boyfriends,
Absolutely.
Family members, others. But I'm wondering what advice you have for people, especially in this day and age where we're so confronted with the potential of radical change through AI, economic, society upheaval, other type things. And they're up with in very extreme pressure situations without that safety net.
Yeah. I I really appreciate speaking about this, because when I was writing the book, I wanted to make sure that people who feel exceedingly lonely felt heard in the stories that they were reading, and that there was something for them to take from this. Because, first of all, loneliness is a state of mind. I mean, we're all vulnerable to it at various periods of our lives. I'm sure all of us in this room have felt very, very lonely. One thing that I've observed in myself and in the people that I interviewed for the book is that when you are going through a personally unprecedented change in your life, it can really exacerbate feelings of loneliness. So even for those who objectively do have friends and a community, many of us have the instinct to sort of shut ourselves off, to alienate ourselves. I remember personally when I found out the news that our surrogate had miscarried for the first time, and I had all these big hopes and dreams of becoming a mom later that year. DJ, I know this will shock you because you know what a chatterbox I am. Like, I literally couldn't talk to anyone for like 5 days. Every time a family member called, I did not want to talk, and I think there were many reasons for that, but the idea of someone not fully understanding what you are personally going through can be such a jarring experience. You almost don't want to set yourself up for failure or for disappointment. And I'm in a situation where I have a loving family, so you can only imagine how hard it is for people who don't even have that person who's calling to show that they care. So first I want to say that because loneliness is a psychological state, anyone is vulnerable to it. And I think that's okay, and I think that's a normal part of processing a change, which is that it does lead to these feelings of exceptionalism, like no one can possibly understand what I'm going through, though of course, if you were to look at the data, of course people can understand what you're going through. The piece of advice I would give to people who do not have the support systems around them is to not limit themselves in terms of who could in fact provide support during times of change. I think in our society, we tend to recommend to people that they seek out those whose stories look very similar to theirs during a trying moment. So a friend's going through a divorce. I say, oh, I actually know this other person who's going through divorce. You should talk to them. They're going to give you some good advice on that front. Or, oh, you've lost a loved one. Go to the bereaved section of the bookstore. Oh, you've lost a job. Okay, here's a job searching community group. That's where you're going to find your people. I've always felt, and this book kind of tested that hypothesis, that we're needlessly limiting ourselves in terms of the well of wisdom and emotional support that we can draw from when we only look for people who've gone through the same narrative beats that we've gone through. Because we have a shared psychology as humans, a lot of the experience of going through change is very similar. We are often bristling at the world's unfairness. We're grieving a past that's no longer available to us. We are contemplating who we can be in this new world, this new future that we've been thrust into against our will. We're wondering what our new social life will look like. We're wondering what the impact is going to be on our relationships, that we're now dealing with a family member who has a chronic illness. Whatever it is, it's surfacing the same kinds of psychological stressors. And so you can imagine that, well, if it's surfacing the same problem statements, then the solution set actually might be more similar than you think. And I first kind of identified this when I was interviewing a bunch of people on the podcast, and I have these discrete episodes, but I was noticing these very unusual connections across people's stories that really did not look similar. So I mentioned in the preface of the book, there was the stage 4 cancer patient who got a diagnosis in his early 30s, who had spent his whole adult life trying to be as healthy as possible. And then there was the woman who found out that her late husband had had a decades-long affair. They were both grappling with a deep feeling of betrayal, and were trying to figure out how to work past that betrayal. These two people might never have found each other, had they been given advice from their communities, right, of where to find solace or help or emotional support. And so those who are looking to build community cast a wide, wide net. you might really surprise yourself in terms of whose experience resonates with you.
I wanted to ask about this of how you do this. And by the way, if you have questions, please make sure you get them on the cards. We'll start answering them soon. The part here is that I think about is vulnerability and how you get comfortable with that to find people. I think it was actually the chapter on Hole in the Heart, if I remember right, that sort of you go really into depth about this. But the part that I sort of think of is like, that's a lot of courage. And that's like, that feels like it takes a lot of emotional strength or something deep to, or despair. I'm not sure, but it feels like, I wonder what advice you have for people to get that courage, to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to find those communities. Because like right now, it seems like the answer is just talk to a chatbot.
Right. Wow, what a thoughtful, God, your questions are so good.
Well, I trained with you, so.
No, exactly. And I'm actually thinking about the fact that it was actually the experience of witnessing the characters in this book, the unbelievable cast of people that I got to interview for the book, open up to me, that gave me the courage to write that final chapter. I did not plan to make any part of this book about my own experience, and I didn't want to. I had one podcast episode about the pregnancy losses, and I dealt with some of the topics, but some of the other stuff, I didn't even want to like dig into my past and revisit a time in my life where I was extremely, extremely anxious and having a lot of OCD rumination. It was a very painful period of time. And it was actually just in consuming the stories of others that it almost felt like my duty to do that. And so my advice would be, okay, you could talk to a chatbot because actually a chatbot can be quite wise. But I actually think turn on an audiobook, subscribe to podcasts where people are sharing their stories. That confidence can build when you see it, when you see that incredible ability in so many other people. I really don't believe that I would have shared as much as I shared had it not been for Dwayne and Tara and Olivia and Ingrid and Marianne, who just like, they were just baring their souls to me. I mean, the number of tears shed in these interviews over years, it was a Herculean effort on their behalf. And because I felt like it was one of the greatest honors of my life to have been in conversation with these extraordinary humans, it then gave me the courage to almost try to like give back, if you will. Like, wow, I was the beneficiary of all their wisdom. The least I can do is share whatever modest wisdom I might have collected from my own stories.
Well, let's, before we get to this, these questions are fantastic. So kudos, audience. These are, what is the advice that you give to us as a community to be good helpers or that safety net for somebody who is in need or who may be vulnerable? Or how do we recognize the signs that somebody is in the need for help?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I should say my training is not in clinical work. So someone with a more clinical background might be able to detect the warning signs much better than I would. I want to always be humble about what I don't know. Absolutely. But I will say the following. At the end of my book, I actually have what's called a change survival kit. It's a distillation of all the science-backed tools and strategies and thought experiments that I want people to play around with, to experiment with themselves when they are in the throes of change, or if they're processing a past change or trying to get ahead of a future one. And it's funny, when I was writing the book, I was writing directly to the person who's the change recipient. And it was only after publishing it that I heard from so many people who gifted it to people in their lives who are struggling. And I thought, oh my God, of course, this is a resource for those who want to help others, to give them that same practical
I've given this book to a lot of people in HR. I'm not making this up because I think of like the people in HR, they have incredibly hard jobs right now.
They really do.
And I think of it as like, how do they help others?
Yeah.
And I think about this a bunch.
Sorry.
No,
I didn't mean to interrupt. I was going to say, but okay, so there's the book in the toolkit that I'm hoping is a helpful resource, but actually, the best service we can give to a person who is experiencing despair or any number of negative emotions that can accompany the fallout of an unexpected change is to be a very attentive listener. And the reason I say that is it is effortless for us to impose our mental frame onto someone else and to assume that they will be responding in the way that we would have responded if we had received the news. And for that reason, one, there can be a failure of empathy because we're not actually appreciating the way in which the change has affected them, or for example, that it provoked something traumatic in their childhood, or it made them feel a certain way about themselves given their starting point when it came to their self-confidence, or the fact that they had a complicated relationship with their sister, and so the fact that they're receiving you have to listen, and you have to kind of assume a blank slate when it comes to their psychological makeup so that you can really understand what they're grappling with and not make too many presumptions. And also, that way you're not too prescriptive about what comes next. I still remember, and I got permission to share this with all of you tonight, when the well-known author Michael Lewis, who's a dear friend of mine, lost his 19-year-old daughter, Dixie, in a car accident. I went to his house maybe like a week or two later, and it was him and his other daughter. And obviously it just like totally shook him and his whole community. And I remember he sat on the couch and he just looked at me and he goes, "Maya, no one knows about grief." Mm-hmm. And I was like, "You're right, dude." He's like, "People are sending me grief books and this book, and they're telling me to join this this talk group and to do this kind of therapy and not this kind of therapy." And he's like, "I have to form the Michael Lewis plan. Like, I just have to figure out what works for me as a person. It's going to be different than maybe what works for my wife and what works for my daughter and my son." And I just thought there was so much wisdom in that, because the caveat of everything that I've shared tonight is that I'm hoping to give people all of these tools, but there are always going to be individual differences. And even more than individual differences, we ourselves will respond differently to different tools or different techniques, depending on the stage of life we're in, depending on the particular change we're navigating, depending on the particular community that we're a part of. And so we have to have a very experimental mindset. I wish I could have just been like, best practices list, here are the top 10 things to do, your life will be better. Like, it would have been great if I could have just guaranteed you happiness and equanimity on the other side of reading the book. But I was very, very thoughtful about what I felt I could reasonably promise a reader. And I couldn't promise happiness, but I could promise that they might think differently about the change they're going through. And sometimes when you're in that rut and you're going through the same thought patterns over and over and over again, different is liberating, like different is freeing. And you'll have to it's a choose your own adventure, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you mentioned Dixie, because what an amazing special kid. And just watching what Michael and the family have had to go through is just like, it's something that you can't even. The empathy level is just one of those things that's just stunning. One of the things that maybe this is a good transition to one of the first questions here is actually about the survival kit. And is there a step that you feel is of the kit or an aspect of the kit that you think is the most challenging for people to get?
Yeah, maybe not challenging to get, but kind of counterintuitive. So one of the most fascinating things I discovered in researching for the book is that denial gets a really bad rap, but actually denial can be very adaptive in the short term. It's obviously a blurry space. You don't want to cultivate denial, And obviously denial can persist long enough that it becomes problematic in yourself or others. But grief researchers say denial is essentially nature's way of letting in only as much as we can handle at any given time. And for some reason, learning that, it kind of released the pressure valve a bit, which is, it's okay if you are unable to stomach the enormity of what's happened in a short period of time. I don't think we're wired to be able to do that if we're being reasonable. And I think we can be very judgmental of ourselves or judgmental of our loved ones, like, oh, they're in denial, like they're not accepting this. But as those researchers say, there is actually grace in denial. It is an evolutionarily adaptive thing. And so there's some interesting studies showing that heart patients who actually had denial had better outcomes over a 6-month period. By 1 year, it stopped delivering gains and they had to contend with their reality. Because if you're in denial for long enough, you'll stop taking the relevant action items to actually try to solve your problem. But that was one where it can take a little while to really internalize that. Like, wait, it's okay to be in denial? Are you sure?
Yeah. It's like it's a negative word.
Like, it's a negative word, and like, I don't want to be delusional. But part of the work is about giving yourself a little, I think, how do I say this? It's like, we often reserve the least amount of compassion for ourselves. And so part of my goal with this book was to try to up the self-compassion meter. Mm-hmm. So that in addition to the burden we feel of the harrowing change we're navigating, we don't now have an additional layer that we're adding on top of that, which is judging our response to what's happening, which I really don't want to have happen.
How do you think about the behavioral research field? And this kind of is a two-part across a couple questions. One is people are curious about, can you share the behavioral research finding that you found most surprising or counterintuitive?
Yeah.
But the field is changing pretty rapidly, at least from my layperson's view of it. And that speed at which we're adapting and sort of changing and needing to refine that toolkit for ourselves, I'm curious, like, how you stay on top of that. So maybe the first part is what are you finding most surprising and counterintuitive, and then how do you adapt or keep yourself evolving with the research?
Yeah, one thing, and sorry, I'm going to answer a little bit of each right now, but one thing that I found so interesting is how durable theories are that lack an evidence base. So one good example of this is, it's somehow caught on. I don't know if it's the portal of Instagram or people engaging in therapy speak or whatnot, that avoidance of any kind is bad. So if you are going through a really tough time, you need to persistently confront your negative emotions. Otherwise, they're going to rear their ugly heads down the line with even greater force, with even greater vengeance, right? So if you find yourself actually feeling a moment of levity after the death of a loved one or whatnot, it's like, oh my God, I let myself go for a second, now I'm gonna have to pay for this down the line. The research shows actually that, one, this whole domain is really subject to individual differences, and distraction is a very healthy and productive tool during times of change. If watching reality TV like Love is Blind and The Bachelor,
no comment,
and Age of Attraction, or like, I don't know, even attending the live finale of The Bachelor in LA during a workday, if that...
Speaking hypothetically.
Very highbrow taste over here. This is really not great for the Commonwealth Club. Do you, seriously. And so that was a really problematic thing, that like, you can't distract yourself because then you're setting your future self up for failure. Just not true. They looked at people following 9/11 and they found actually that people who had more positive affect following that and were able to engage in healthy distraction had better long-term well-being outcomes. Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing I think that has been kind of impressed upon people is that certain traits we have are immutable. So this actually is one of my favorite and a little bit counterintuitive findings from the book, which is there's a lot of talk about attachment styles. And I feel like behavioral stuff, psychology, we go through these cycles and trends of it's all about love languages today, and next year it's gonna be all about attachment styles and the only framework that matters in society, right? And so for a long time, people believed that their attachment styles were more or less fixed based on their early childhood experiences. So if you had an avoidant attachment style or an anxious attachment style, you're stuck with it, tough luck. But actually, research shows that attachment styles are far more malleable than researchers previously thought. There are lots of deliberate steps you can take to strengthen secure attachments. And even just reflecting on past instances of secure attachments with another person can decrease anxious attachment behaviors over just a 4-month period. And so I love that kind of research. I just love busting myths or busting popular narratives.
Is there a type of thing that you hear over and over again that you're just like cringe? Is it like Myers-Briggs or something? Like,
yeah.
Is there a set of things like you're just like, would you guys please just not, like, I wish that idea would just die and disappear, because it would make our life better.
With the risk of alienating a lot of people. So Enneagrams, I care so little about Enneagrams. I haven't even done the research to know why I should find them repellent, but I find them repellent. And I'm very confident that Enneagrams are not a thing that are meaningful. But this is not based on any actual research, so I should caveat that. But when I heard that, I was like, oh God, is this the new Myers-Briggs, right? Have you done an Enneagram thing?
Thankfully, I can say no.
Okay. It's a safe space, DJ.
I haven't been subjected to it, but like I do think
I think that's one of them.
I think one of these things that's really important is that I see this, that more and more of some of these ideas are being brought into the high school setting or the middle school setting, and it sets kids up or parts of society up that says you are this.
Exactly. I was just going to say, you took the words right out of my mouth. I don't like the typecasting. Mm-hmm. People will still, in my current working environment, reference some quiz they took when they were in elementary school and what that quiz said they should have been when they grew up. People anchor on this stuff. And so the Enneagram stuff of like, or even the Myers-Briggs, like ENTJ, it's like, I'm extroverted until I'm not. Put me at a wedding with people I don't know. Can't do it. Get very socially anxious, And so I just feel it also doesn't capture nuance.
Right.
And
what
like context
identity?
Specificity.
It feels like we're getting into these worlds where, it's like whether I hear kids all the time, they're like, I'm bad at math. I was like, guess what? So was I. So was my doctorate in math. But like I sucked at it until I wasn't.
Yeah, totally.
But there is this interesting framing that we anchor people to. I wanted, because we're going to be running low on time and we got so many good questions here.
I'm not good at pithy answers.
No, these are great though. So, one of the questions here is about Dwayne Betts, and who is serving time in prison, and the concept of moral elevation. What are some sources and places that one can find moral elevation in today's world? And
first of all, thank you for reading that chapter.
Yeah, trust me, this is Commonwealth Club. They read the book.
Oh my God.
But especially with the world where we're in. I mean, we're in a political time, for those that are going to be watching this later. We're in a time where people are talking about the destruction of certain civilizations or countries. We're talking about this, the what is morality? What is our role of responsibility? You've been in those rooms in the White House, and at the United Nations, in these places. And so when we look at someone who's gone through moral elevation and figured out how to lift themselves up, literally moral bootstraps is the way I think about that chapter. What's your take?
Yeah. Let me first share what moral elevation is for those who don't know. It's that warm, fuzzy feeling we get in our chests when we witness someone else's extraordinary behaviors. So that could be their courage or kindness or self-sacrifice or grit or care for others. Whatever it is, moral elevation doesn't simply feel good. It actually rewires our brains. And that's because when we witness someone else act in ways that violate our assumptions of what humans are capable of in the best way possible, it actually cracks open our own imagination about what we are capable of. Dwayne Betts was sentenced to 9 years in adult prison as a 16-year-old for a carjacking he committed. He had an incredibly promising future, and then he watched every door close around him. And he said that he wasn't just mourning a future he could have lived, he was also so scared of who he might become behind bars. He worried, maybe I'll become violent. Maybe I'll develop a gambling habit. What if someone charges into my cell? What am I going to do? He worried that the worst of him might be extracted in this environment. And it was actually an encounter with a fellow prisoner that inspired moral elevation within Dwayne and changed the trajectory of his life. He came across a guy named Bilal who, Dwayne said, carried himself like a man in uniform. Dwayne had come to believe that in order to survive prison life, you had to kind of fly under the radar, don't get too close to anyone, definitely don't help anyone, don't form any kinds of alliances. And yet Bilal was the kind of guy who taught the younger prisoners how to box in order to protect themselves from the threat of violence, sexual violence. He would get up 2 hours before count time, do 250 push-ups in his cell. He would have his prison uniform crisply ironed every day, clean shaven. Dwayne said Bilal was basically saying, no, this is my identity. This is who I am. And that showed Dwayne that maybe he didn't have to be a certain kind of person just because he was a prisoner. Maybe he wasn't destined to have a certain sort of future just because he carried this label. And it was with that more empowered mindset that when he encountered a book of poetry a couple weeks later, and in particular a poem written by Etheridge Knight about the experience of a young black boy who was raped in prison, that Dwayne realized, well, I can't do for the young boys what Bilal could do for them. I can't do for the young, men of color, young or boys, what Bilal could do. He's stronger and he actually knows how to box. But what I can do is dignify their experiences through my words. I know how to write. I love reading. I can do this. And he started writing poems. And whenever he would get enough, he would take thread from a torn up pillowcase and thread it together to assemble a book of these poems. And fast forward a couple decades, Dwayne today is a Yale Law School graduate. He's a MacArthur Genius Prize winner. He writes some of the most stirring poetry I've ever read about the experience of being in prison. And the fact that he credits that to this moment of moral elevation with a prisoner, it just shows how powerful that experience can be and how in this very dark and disconnected time, when we feel more separated from one another than ever before, we can appreciate that there is still so much more beauty to be found. That really lifts my spirits.
Let me challenge it because, you and I both worked in an era together of moral elevation being contagious.
I know.
And showing the path forward. When they go low, we go high.
Yep.
To quote Michelle Obama.
It was such an innocent time in many ways.
Yeah, right. And so
we didn't know to even expect what would come ahead of us. We had the purity.
Why is that not, I know there's no easy answers to this, but as a social scientist, you look at this, and this gets to some of the questions that people have around loneliness, AI. People are hurting.
Yeah.
People are really hurting around the world and society. And we have these unbelievable role models, like Jerome Betts and others, and other types of moral elevation. We see this, Martin Luther King, other iconic people, Gandhi, Huerta. Why is this not working? Because it feels like we're sliding. Are we sliding down the slope rather than rising up?
We might be. I'm not feeling great about the state of the world. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think what I try to do, because, they have these interesting studies where they show that when people reflect on society as a whole, or an organization as a whole, they'll give it a lower rating than they will their smaller team, the smaller community that they live in. And I think I try to do a little bit of that, where I'm okay, it feels like the world is on fire. And then I think about the barista that I might say hi to every day, or walking down the street and watching someone help an elderly person cross the street, or just witnessing any number of kind acts over the course of the day. And does it change my perception of the fate of humanity? Of course not. I still have a lot of anxiety around it, but it does restore some of my faith in humanity. Because if you just watch the news, if you just rely on your X feed or whatever doom scrolling you're doing, it might actually it might unfairly represent humanity.
So to help, give us something concrete from the toolkit that helps pull us out of the tailspin. You find yourself scrolling.
Oh, on the rumination part. Okay, sorry.
Rumination,
yeah.
or any
or
type
anything.
of tailspin.
Yeah.
You've read the news, you've watched something, you're just horrified, whatever it is, doesn't matter what your political affiliation is. But you're in the tailspin. What are things that in the toolkit that we should be looking to?
Sure. Let me wrap up. So the question had asked about like, where can you find moral elevation? The truth is that it's actually everywhere if you're willing to put down your phone and be observant. This is what I've discovered. Because I was like, well, I'm not going to have that moral elevation experience that Dwayne had. I'm like, because Maya, you're literally on your phone 24 hours a day. Why do you think you'd experience it? If you put your phone in this thing called a pocket and you let yourself walk around planet Earth and you just observe people and you engage with people and you smile at people and you strike up small talk, you will be astounded at how good humans can be. And it has been the single most transformative takeaway for me in writing this book. It has completely changed my posture in everyday environments.
Get rid of the phone.
Like, I mean, I still use my phone a ton. I'm saying being more deliberate. Yeah, I'm not a purist about any of this. So there's some people who are like, I don't check emails on weekends. I'm like, how? How do you not check emails on weekends? So I'm not being a purist about it. It's all a matter of degree. And just having a little bit of time in which you're engaging with other humans, and it can just be people watching, but where you're not distracted and you're really present and intentional about the observation, I promise you will deliver returns. Okay, so that's a moral elevation thing. It's everywhere to be found. And if you cannot find it in your current environment, let's say you're in a very toxic work environment, you're in a very toxic relationship, and you're like, I'm sorry, I can't see outside of this. You can mine your past for experiences of moral elevation that you've witnessed in any part of your life. In the book, I talk about reflecting on the horrific shooting at Mother Emanuel Church in 2016. And I remember witnessing the daughter of one of the victims extend forgiveness to the racist killer from the courtroom. It was astonishing. I was speechless. I could not believe that she had this depth
I couldn't
of
have done it.
Oh, absolutely
I've
not.
Seen this and
First person to not be able to do that. Sorry, never. Her depth of forgiveness is a perfect example of the sort of thing that can inspire moral elevation. And what I love about this tool and why I think it's powerful during these times is that it transcends domain. So at that moment in 2016, I wasn't looking to forgive anyone in particular, but it did challenge me to wonder, but can I be more empathetic? Can I be kinder? Can I be more loving? Any number of other character traits, it can push you in the right direction. Okay, rumination. I devote an entire chapter to mental spirals because I have a personal PhD in rumination. This is my Achilles heel. I can ruminate till the cows come home, I swear to God. And so I have that quintessential, wake up at 3 a.m, the mind starts going, and it's everything from small things like, God, why did I say that to my coworker? That was so embarrassing. And then you replay it over and over. You have the magical thinking maybe if I replay it enough, I can change it. I can back to the future this thing, and intercept and then say not an embarrassing thing. And then of course, all the existential stuff. Catastrophizing the future is also a specialty of mine. And so one of the beautiful traits that evolution has endowed us with is the ability to mentally time travel. So what does this mean? Plain terms, you can travel into the past, you can travel into the future. Not all species can do this, right? It's actually incredible that so much of the time we spend in our minds is actually not in the present moment. It's back and it's forward. But we can leverage this to our advantage during hard times. You can travel into the past if you're going through something tough in your personal life to remind yourself of a moment where you displayed unexpected courage or fortitude. in the face of adversity. It's kind of a reminder that you might have a little bit more strength than you think. Or my favorite one when it comes to, because I have a story about someone who had really profound eco-anxiety. She was absolutely devastated about climate change, right? And was unable to engage in everyday life because she was so horrified by what was going to happen to planet Earth. And she traveled in the past to look at examples of times where humans faced existential crises, and through a power combination of collective action and self-sacrifice, were able to find their way to the other side. And it doesn't make it destiny that that is going to happen, right? You need actors, you need politicians, you need so many different forces to come together in pursuit of that. But it can give you hope that while the specific challenge we're facing now might be unprecedented in terms of the details, it's not the first time that we as humanity have faced an enormous challenge of the scale of climate change. The other thing that you can do is travel into the future to remind yourself that whatever your current preoccupation is transient. This does not work in the context of climate change because that will always be a problem, sadly. I caveat in the book. I'm like, just so you know, I'm aware this does not apply to climate change. But let's say you're dealing with a more quotidian issue, like that coworker example, right? You're like really upset about the way they treated you, or you're upset about something you said and you're replaying it over and over. You can just travel 5 hours into the future, 5 days into the future, 5 years into the future. And what that does is it allows you to zoom out on the experience to achieve what is known as psychological distance, where you see your problem with a little bit more objectivity. It helps to reduce a bit of the emotional fog. And you realize, oh, this current preoccupation is likely to carry less significance in the future. Like, in 5 years from now, will I even have the same coworker that's a pain in my butt right now? Maybe not. And so that can be a powerful way to just break out of the prison that your brain creates when you are in the throes of rumination, and where your brain is devilish in its ability to convince you that this is the only thing worth focusing on for the next God knows how many hours.
Okay, so on ruminations, we're at time, but I want to squeeze in one last question.
Okay.
And I think you know what this question is going to be.
I don't.
So we're going to do the Tom Khalil question.
Oh gosh, okay. He was already my boss for 4 years. You're bringing him back?
Yeah,
He's
well,
my boss at the White House.
So we did this exercise very regularly, which is if you had 5 minutes with the president,
oh my God.
you can ask the president,
not
make
this
a speech.
president though, right? I don't want 5 minutes. I'm foregoing my 5. One of you guys can have it.
Well, that's going to be not a good because you're supposed to use your 5 minutes. You're Maya Shankar.
I'm teasing. I'm teasing.
All right, so you have 5 minutes. You can ask them to make a speech. They can call someone. What are you going to use your 5 minutes with this president for?
And I can kind of impose my will on the president in those 5 minutes.
Sure.
Like, assume that
you're Maya Shankar.
I'm like,
you can impose your will.
that I'm extremely persuasive.
You are persuasive. You had Chris Hemsworth on your podcast.
We need to reestablish our relationship with the truth, with facts. That is among one of the most existential threats that we face right now, which is we don't seem to care anymore about what evidence shows or what people have said. Even when there's video footage showing the thing that they've said, it just seems like we have a very tenuous relationship with reality. And that scares me profoundly. I don't know what it looks like to live in a healthy democracy if we do not repair our relationship with facts.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm not ending on that one.
Sorry, I'm getting so heated about it.
I'm going to ruminate.
Oh
otherwise,
God.
Okay, I'm going to ask you in 30 seconds.
What's my favorite ice cream flavor? Mint chocolate chip. There, it's happier.
Very divisive, but I support that. How do you stay positive in these times?
Oh, okay, that's a really nice one. I feel like cognitive science is the greatest empathy builder, because when you understand why people have arrived at the views or beliefs that they hold, it is very hard to hate a person. I can find their beliefs reprehensible, but it's harder to find them reprehensible. And I feel gratitude that I've been in this sphere for so long, because I feel like I don't feel some of the divides that other people might feel, because I have this lens on all the time, this like cognitive science lens of like, oh, well, we know why people form the beliefs that they do or the attitudes they do. It's not based on X, Y, or Z. It's actually based on these other factors, like the family they grew up in and inherited beliefs and tribal membership and all this other stuff. And I think it makes me feel hopeful, that feeling of connection, even when I vehemently disagree with someone, like that shared humanity is still very much intact. And my hope is that some of the work I do has even the most modest impact on making a person feel closer to another person that they might never have encountered, or might have just, written off from the get-go because their belief system was so different.
I think that's a good place to end on. Much better. I feel better now.
And then my postscript to the 5 minutes in the office. No.
So our thanks to Maya Shankar, author.
Thank you guys so much for being such an effective audience.
Yes, absolutely.
And DJ, thank you.
Of course.
As you know, I have known DJ for over 15 years at this point. I was able to marvel at his genius when I was at OSTP, and the incredible enthusiasm he brought, not just to his work, but to all of our work. He was just, it's like some PR company paid him to be everyone's cheerleader all the time. I'm so grateful for the support that you have given me and every member of the Office of Science and Tech and Digital community coming out of the White House. It's been a vibrant space for us to still feel like we're intact, despite everything that's happened politically. And I really see you at the helm of being that glue for that community. So I just wanted to say how grateful I am to you for everything you do for us and for society.
It's an honor and a pleasure to do it right alongside of you. And so with that, our thanks to Maya Shankar, author of The Other Side of Change, Who We Become When Life Makes Other Plans. I know many of you have read it, but we have signed copies here today. And Maya's here. And so we encourage you to pick a copy of Maya's books here. And if not, from your local bookstore. And please remember, library too. Please, we love libraries. And remember, please consider becoming a member of the Commonwealth World Affairs Club to support more great programming like this one. I also want to thank our team here that's here at the Commonwealth Club World Affairs and our volunteers here tonight. Thank you, all of you. For information about Commonwealth Club World Affairs membership or upcoming programs, please visit www.commonwealthclub.org or talk to any of the great volunteers here today at the club. I'm DJ Patil. Thank you. Be safe, be happy, be bold. Most of all, thank you, Maya, for being here. And thank you for all your work.
Thank you so much.